Welcome to The World This Week with me, Gavin Lee, here every week assessing the global events of the last 7 days with a panel as distinguished world affairs correspondents. It's been a momentous week in the Middle East with all of the remaining living hostages released by Hamas in Gaza after 2 years of war, with the ceasefire still holding a week on. Nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners also freed, the majority held without trial or charge after being detained in the aftermath of October the 7th. 250 of them serving sentences for terrorism and multiple murders, being deported to Turkey, Qatar and Egypt. And it was in Sharm el-Sheikh where President Trump formally signed the first phase of his peace plan. Many pitfalls remain. The immediate focus for the UN is getting food aid to a desperate population and calculating the overwhelming costs of rebuilding a territory from the ruins.
Of the negotiations will begin.
Well, it started. It started as far as we're concerned. Phase 2 has started. And, the phases are all a little bit mixed in with each other. They're going to start cleaning up. You look at Gaza, and it needs a lot of cleanup.
It's been a week that's seen the president of Madagascar flee the country in fear of his life after military rebellion. Ange Rajoelina had faced weeks of youth-led protests, which started with rallies over the constant power cuts and water shortages on the Indian Ocean island. Those protests grew into anti-government corruption demonstrations, the pivotal moment being when the elite army unit called Capsat organised a coup in 2009 and brought President Ange Rajoelina to power. Well, the same group entered once again at the weekend and brought him down. Reports he was flown out on a French military jet from the former colony. No comment yet from the French Foreign Ministry.
It feels like we've just been released from prison. We know very well all the harm he's done. I'm truly relieved that Ange Rajoelina is no longer in power.
We won't stop here. Madagascar needs to be purified. The whole system must change.
In a week where another of Donald Trump's political opponents has been criminally indicted on federal charges, John Bolton, the president's former national security advisor, will release an unflattering tell-all book about his time with Trump in the White House being investigated over the handling of classified information. The charges for the 76-year-old follow that of New York Attorney General Letitia James and ex-FBI Director James Comey. The three indictments come after President Trump took to social media to call for his opponents to be prosecuted. And it's been a week where the head of Britain's intelligence service, MI5, declared Chinese state operatives are, quote, a daily threat to national security in the UK. Sir Ken McCullum told reporters in his yearly update he was frustrated to hear of the collapse of a case involving two men accused of spying for China just weeks before the trial was due to go ahead because evidence couldn't be obtained from the British government, referring to China as a national threat. The two men denied the claims. The case has ongoing ramifications for the government.
Here we have two individuals seeking to extract information from us. And the government's response is not, as mine was, do everything you can to make sure the prosecution works, but no, process. Well, who the hell's side are you on?
In the studio with me tonight, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Parsons, veteran foreign journalist, analyst, former BBC Moscow correspondent, former director of the Georgian service at the Radio Free Europe, and once of this Paris, ex-France 24 chief foreign affairs editor. And it is great to have you back with us.
You.
A friend of the programme, I now call you, Rob. Let's start by asking you the news that keeps coming around and around here in France, the revolving door that is French Prime Ministers, and the one that forgot to get out, Sébastien Lecornu, surviving 2 votes of no confidence this week, but a cost to President Macron's signature policy, which you covered, the pension reforms, the raising the pension age. Is this the last roll of the dice for President Macron?
I don't know. I think he's determined to stay on to the very end of his term, by hook or by crook. He's got a breathing space now that after the failure of the vote of confidence to try and get rid of Lecornu put forward by the left and the right. So he has got that period now. But the problem for him will be, as soon as they get down to the nitty-gritty of passing the budget for 2026, there are so many things in that which are unacceptable to a large number, probably a majority of the members of the Assemblée Nationale, the French Parliament, that it's difficult to see how they're going to resolve those differences. So, going round in full circle, I think, before very long. Unless Lecornu, who's managed things pretty well over the last couple of weeks or so, can sort of cobble together enough votes to push the budget through. I imagine there are plenty of people in the French Parliament who are also tired of the instability of French politics and perhaps would like to see this through to the end, till the next presidential election in 2027, and avoid the instability that would undoubtedly come, if this government was forced out of office and some alternative had to be rustled up at the last minute.
The soldier monk, he calls himself. He gets to live another day. Rob, great to have you with us. Let's go to London. Let's bring in welcome Alex Hearn, The Economist AI writer focusing on science and technology of artificial intelligence. Great to have you with us tonight, Alex. We're going to delve into AI slop, dead internet theory in due course. But first, I want to talk to you about a very interesting piece you've done this week, the change in cybercrime strategies. Talk us through the thief-thug dichotomy and how it's devastating businesses like Jaguar Land Rover.
Yes. So what we've had for over a decade now is ransomware, crypto ransomware, this technology that encrypts your hard drive and demands payment to release the contents back to you. Now, so far, historically, that sort of criminal has acted like a thief. They've snuck in, they've lifted some documents, they've snuck out, and they've asked for payment. What started happening recently is they've realized that if you want to extract money from someone, the easier way is to turn up with a baseball bat and threaten to break their legs. And the digital equivalent of that is, once you've made it into someone's system, you don't drop a quiet piece of ransomware and get out. You do as much damage as you can. You let the company know that you have continued access and tell them the beatings will continue until payment arrives.
That is a big change. It's a very interesting podcast on The Economist. You've done a real deep dive into that. Also, there's a new programme for The Economist, The Insider, behind the scenes, internal discussions about stories. Tell us about that and your role, Insider AI.
Yes. So we have 5 shows, one every Tuesday featuring our editor-in-chief, talking about the stories behind the stories. The Economist always presents a uniform view to the world. We famously don't even have bylines on our articles. But internally, there's massive debate, as there is in any newsroom. And so this is one of our first attempts to really open that up and let people see the conversations that happen before they hit our front pages. But then every Thursday, we have 4 rolling shows on geopolitics, business, defense, and my show on tech, which I co-host with Tom Standage, our deputy editor.
I'm looking forward to seeing it, and a brave man as well, allowing them to go behind the scenes for your candid conversations too. Great to have you with us. Let's go to Berlin. Let's bring in Stephen Erlanger, Chief Diplomat Correspondent for Europe for the New York Times. Good evening, Stephen. Thank you for being with us. I see something you've been posting about this week. Is those incredible images of reporters leaving the Pentagon en masse, cardboard boxes in hand, lanyards no longer necessary, refusing to sign the new Pentagon rules this week, which basically means there's no resident press corps within the Pentagon. What's your take on what's going on there?
Well, it's an effort by this very odd former major, Pete Hegseth, who calls himself the Secretary of War now, even though Congress hasn't agreed, to limit the press. He wants to make sure that leaks stop from the Pentagon. So he's basically throwing normal journalists out of the Pentagon because he's requiring them, if they want to stay and keep their credentials, to sign something that goes totally against journalism, which was that they would clear everything with press people and they would reveal nothing secret and have no anonymous sources. So the whole thing is bizarre. I mean, to some degree, this is what the White House is trying to do by packing the White House press room with people who agree with Donald Trump and like to flatter him. This is an administration that is at war with the press. It's certainly at war with the mainstream press. It's suing my newspaper, the New York Times, for $15 billion on an absurd claim. That's more than the whole company's worth. It's been thrown out by a judge once, and I suspect will be thrown out again. But I mean, this is part of the whole Trump experience, which is to pretend that his administration is defending the people against these twisted, woke, left-wing journalists who are misleading everyone in the name of what? I don't know.
Well, The Hegseth team apparently cheered this on when it was happening. They say it's a good riddance to fake news. As you say, journalists, more than 50 of them, saying this is complete intimidation tactics and oversight. They'll carry on doing their jobs outside of the White House. There is one remaining outlet, the far-right One American News Network. So it'll be a lonely job for them to pass on the information from the Pentagon effectively. Stephen, great that you're with us. Let's complete the lineup. Let's head to Jerusalem. Welcome, Noga Tonopolsky. Noga, it is great that we'll speak at length tonight after another complex week. The aftermath of the ceasefire announcements only this time last week, which is holding. I note from your social media this week that amidst the AI slop on X, and aside from your non-stop Middle East coverage, you've kept an eye on your place of birth, Argentina. It looks like Argentina's president, Javier Milei, is about to get a $40 billion bailout package from the US, potential breathing space for his reforms with caveats.
Yes. And it appears that the MAGA base, Donald Trump's MAGA base, is objecting to this pretty loudly. So what we're seeing is, again, another fissure between the movement still known as MAGA, but that seems to have taken on a life of its own. We've seen this since the murder of Charlie Kirk. We've seen this very much on the Israel-Gaza matter. We see it with this week's revelation about the young Republicans, and their fandom of Nazis, and we're seeing it now regarding Argentina.
Well, he said, President Trump, that if he does well in the midterm elections, it's a goer. He says if he doesn't, quote, we won't waste our time if his party loses. There you go, transactional diplomacy. Great to have you with us too, Noga. Let's begin. Monday morning, 8 o'clock at the Erez crossing in northern Gaza, where 7 of the last 20 living hostages were finally released by Hamas into the arms of the Red Cross and onwards for medical checks once back home in Israel. 2 hours later, in the southern city of Han Yunis, the last 13 living captives set free after 2 years, 6 days of war and 4 days into the ceasefire. Among them, Avinatan Or finally reunited with his partner, Noah Argamani. The footage of them, both separated and dragged away from each other at the Nova Music Festival, was one of the most widely recognised images of the attacks. Noah rescued in an Israeli Special Forces operation in June last year. This week, their reunion caught on camera too. After all this time, she said in a statement, after all the darkness, we can begin again. And 35 kilometres from Tel Aviv, in Ramallah, hundreds of families gathered for the release of their loved ones. 40 buses carrying just under 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, 250 serving the most serious crimes, deported to Qatar, Turkey, Egypt. The vast majority, though, have been detained without charge or trial since October the 7th, under Israel's unlawful combatants law. One of them, photojournalist Shadi Abu Sido, had been detained while reporting at the Al-Shifa hospital last year. The BBC covered his return.
After the lies of an Israeli intelligence officer had broken him, he said, this was the moment he came alive again.
My family was still alive. He'd been lying when he told me, we killed your family, we killed your children.
President Trump arrives in Israel, speaks in the Knesset of a new golden dawn for Gaza, Israel and the Middle East before heading to Egypt to formally sign the first phase of the peace plan. Western and Arabic leaders gathered. Optics arranged so each would shake his hand one by one as he held court in front of a sign marked Peace 2025. While in Gaza, new satellite imagery showed the latest assessment of the damage. 60 million tonnes of debris, 80% of the territory's buildings destroyed, 90% of housing destroyed or damaged, according to the UN. And according to UNICEF, 70% of water sanitation systems no longer functioning. And through that lens, and still with the immediate issues unresolved, lack of food aid, questions over the transfer of the remaining bodies of Israeli hostages and Hamas's arm wing, regrouping on the streets and publicly refusing to disarm or leave. Let's begin with you, Noga, on the moments of the week that you've witnessed that you think speak of the state of the war and the possibility of peace and the steps ahead.
Let me tell you first a few anecdotes about the state of the war from inside Israel. The Israeli Prime Minister today announced that his cabinet is going to vote on Sunday to rename this war. And it's, of course, a political hot potato. Everybody everybody in Israel calls this the October 7th War. And I'm pretty sure that's how it will be remembered. But the official name accorded it by the government was Swords of Iron, a name hinting at heroism. And now that Prime Minister Netanyahu is very, very actively fixed on making sure that his narrative is the one that Israel adopts, his victorious narrative regarding the war, he has decided that his cabinet will vote on Sunday to call it the War of Resurrection, no less. And it's getting quite a lot of mockery because it turns out that Israel does not feel that victorious, despite the national sigh of relief over getting the living hostages back, despite the very clear feeling of an ongoing struggle to still get the deceased hostages back. What you sense in Israel is very far from victory. I spoke today in Jerusalem with a number of Likud voters or ex-Likud voters, the Prime Minister's party, and none of them feel victorious, and also none of them are persuaded that the war is over, because the end of the war was imposed on Israel while one day after the Prime Minister made a speech saying the war's not over. So what you feel in Israel is unease, lack of trust in the authorities, and a lot of fear about the future.
And possibly, Rob, a framing with a view, given that the war of resurrection, I think was what Noga said, the idea of the election campaign beginning for Mr. Netanyahu as well. And some say that actually Trump's visit was a sign of that, almost using it as a launching pad for it. You spent years going back and forth to the Middle East. You were in Ramallah, if I remember, last time for the exchange of prisoners and hostages. Tell me about the messages you've been getting, the context that you've got, the significance of this week and the pitfalls ahead.
Well, pretty much what Noga has just been saying. I don't think there is a feeling of victory. And I think there are probably several reasons for that. One of them is the most obvious one, that Hamas is still there. It's not demilitarized. And it's quite clearly strengthening its position in the area that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, are not now present. Israel is seeing that every day. And the frustration for them, of course, is that at the moment, at least, they know they need Hamas to get the dead hostages out to ensure that there is a degree of security in there. But the problem going forward is, where are they going to have the physical means, the coercive means, to get rid of Hamas if the United States, in the form of Donald Trump, who is pressing very hard on Israel at the moment, and presumably as long as his tension span holds, will continue to do so, is saying to the Israelis, this war is over. He doesn't want them to start it again. He's looking down the road to the next Nobel Peace Prize, when he hopes he'll be up there celebrating not just peace in Gaza, but in Ukraine as well. So that pressure is not going to go away. And the other thing I think that's important, and Noga was sort of hinting at it here, is that the mood in Israeli society is very depressed, I think. So regardless of what happens, I think, in Gaza now, that's not easily going to be shifted. There's a feeling, I think, that Israeli society is not in a good place, that it's very divided. The stuff that Netanyahu's been doing over the last couple of years in his role as Prime Minister has disturbed a lot of people. The feeling is that he's maneuvering to stay on. That makes people feel, where on earth is this country going to go? After all this time where we've been trying to create this new model state, model of democracy in the Middle East, what's our future going to be?
Stephen, let me bring you in, because with a number of things just to point out. First of all, Hamas this evening saying that quite an extraordinary message, that they would like to be around or see themselves around for the next 3 to 5 years, whatever the administration is alongside them, and that they're not considering downing arms right at this point. Can I ask you about Europe's role in this? We saw an image flashing up, didn't we, of Tony Blair a moment ago, Blair in Arabia, it said, and that's the only European kind of mentioned by President Trump right now. The Board of Peace, although President Trump seems less warm to him being on it than he did before. What's your take?
I give Trump credit for pushing Netanyahu into the ceasefire, because the Israelis had no idea how this was going to end. And Bibi certainly didn't, and didn't seem to want it to end. I wouldn't be shocked if he calls new elections, frankly, right now. But Trump got what he wanted. He doesn't care about the rest of the deal. I mean, we've done phase one. Hamas will never disarm. Who will go in and disarm them? I mean, let's be realistic. This is not going to happen. And this movement toward a new agency for the Palestinian Authority, the help of the Gulfies, the help of Tony Blair, all this really is dependent on a security situation in Gaza that involves Hamas leaving, dismantling, disarming. So it's kind of like, if we ever get there, give me another call. I think it's going to be very, very difficult, very, very difficult. And Trump, it's like Iran. He's decided that he's obliterated the Iran nuclear program, so it's over, it's done with, and he's moved on to something else. So, I don't mean to be too pessimistic. I would love the war to end. I would love to have Palestinian agency in Gaza, the rebuilding to start, all the horrors to be ameliorated as best as possible with European help, with American help, blah, blah, blah. But, right now, I have to admit to being a little pessimistic about the next stages.
Well, we didn't ask you to come on because you were Tony Robbins or Mr. Motivator, Stephen. We wanted your candid insights. No good just listening
well,
to
you have it.
the timeline for the next, sustainable amount of time. I see for an international stability force in the agreement, it says it's estimated at 2 to 3 months post-peace agreement. So we're looking at the start of the year, are we, if things hold?
Sure, but I mean, can you imagine an Arab country going into Gaza to police Palestinians and fighting Hamas? Is that really politically acceptable at home? Can you imagine some night's Dutch soldier going into the tunnels to get blown up? I mean, Hamas has still a lot of weapons. It's obviously disintegrated as a fighting force, but it still is exercising control. It's fighting the Hamullahs, the other clans that oppose it inside Gaza. And it's going to be very hard for me to see who's going to displace them. It would be nice to have that happen, but someone's going to have to do it either with a lot of arms and some bloodshed, or some incredible political pressure that I just don't see happening yet.
Noga, I think just listening to Stephen, there is a part of this so-called international stabilisation force. So you look at those faces that were in the meeting in Egypt, and Sharm el-Sheikh, the head of the president of Indonesia, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, are all expressing an interest. Where do you see that going?
But today it was revealed that the president of Indonesia is, one of the questions he asked Donald Trump at that summit in Sharm el-Sheikh is, where is Eric? Because he's interested in entering business deals with the president's son. So I think we all have to accept that we're in a new diplomatic era in which personal interests reign, and whether they be Prime Minister Netanyahu's personal interest in surviving politically, or Donald Trump's interest in expanding his own and his family's holdings in the region or beyond it. So I think that's part of it. But I agree with what both Rob and Steve have said. We don't really see the plan presented by Donald Trump, the 20-point plan, was basically a rewritten version of a plan presented by the Biden administration as of March 2024. Some version of this deal was on the table between March, since then. And what we did see in January of this year was the two administrations very unusually come together. So the incoming Trump team accepted what the Biden team had put together, and Israel and Hamas did enter a brief period of a ceasefire, about 6 weeks, during which numerous Israeli hostages and many more Palestinian prisoners and detainees were released. But Israel broke that ceasefire very brazenly on March 2nd. It didn't appear that Donald Trump cared. And what appears to have jogged his memory this time is Israel's bungled attack in Doha, the Qatari capital, in an attempt to assassinate Hamas's leadership there. I think the Israeli politicians, the government that made this decision, we have to say, against the advice of Israel's military leadership, they opposed that strike at that moment. but the executive branch that gave the order seemed to have miscalculated the American connection to Qatar. So if we're talking about dismantling Hamas, disarming Hamas, all of these words, whenever it happens, I think if it takes until January, February to come into place, I think that Hamas will be pretty well re-ensconced as the administrator of Gaza. I know that some in the Israeli right wing are talking about a two-state solution, I'm quoting now, within Gaza. In other words, part will be administered by Hamas, the basically populated part of Gaza, and Israel will take care of beyond the yellow line. But I think that could be too late. And the only force, as I see it, that can really undo Hamas as we know it would be Qatar, not just militarily, but through its moral force as the host and the supporter of Hamas.
Noga, always great to hear your experience and thoughts. Let's take you to events on the world this week, the world right now as well, because events ongoing inside at the White House, President Trump meeting President Zelensky as we speak. So the backdrop to this, we know that President Zelensky wants to have better protection, better ability to protect the skies since it was stripped off him some of that weapons funding from President Trump. They want Tomahawk missiles as well. Let's take a listen for a few moments to President Trump on the significance of this meeting, the third time between the two leaders.
And I think that things are coming along pretty well. It began with Alaska, where I think certain guidelines were discussed, and we want to see if we can get this done. This was long ago into the Biden administration. I came here and we inherited this, and we'd like to see if we could finish it, end it. We want it ended. So many people have died in this war, and we're gonna get it ended. So I just want to thank you all very much. If you have a couple of questions, go ahead, please. In fact, before I do that, let me just ask the President to say a few words. Thank you, President.
Pleasure. Glad to be again, Mr. President. Thank you very much for the invitation. Again, my congratulations with your successful ceasefire in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Yeah, and you did it. And I think this is the momentum to finish Russia's war against Ukraine. I think that, yes, we understand that Putin is not ready. I think not ready, but I think that I'm confident that with your help, we can stop this war. And we really need it. We see that they don't have successful steps on the battlefield, and it's good. I think that their army is weak now, but a lot of losses. They have a lot of losses and in economy and people. And I think this is a very important moment. And I wanted to thank you, Mr. President, after our phone calls. Yesterday I had a good opportunity to meet with the big American energy companies, and they're ready to help us. Yes, after all these attacks on our infrastructure, Russian attacks, and etc. And I had also meetings, thanks to your team. We had meetings with a good military companies. We spoke about air defense, and I want to share it after with details where we are. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Very good. And I think it looks beautiful in his jacket.
Yeah?
It's beautiful. I hope people notice. It's actually very stylish. I like it.
President Trump.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Under the Biden administration, the White House was fearing of a possible escalation. They were not allowing the Ukrainians to strike into Russia, fearing of this escalation.
Yeah.
Would your administration allow Ukrainians to strike deep into Russia?
We're going to be talking about that. That's something we'll be talking about. You're right. It's an escalation, but we'll be talking about that.
Mr. President, will President Zelensky join you in Hungary to meet President Putin?
Because it's a leader that we like. We like Viktor Orban. He likes him. I like him. It's a country that's a safe country. Done a very good job. He's been a very good leader in the sense of running his country. He doesn't have a lot of the problems that other countries have. And so we've decided that we'll be going to be with Viktor Orban, and I think he'll be a very good host.
President Trump, President Trump, President Trump, right here. President Trump.
Hungary, yeah. We're doing Hungary, yeah.
So you're back with us. We're listening to the confirmation from President Trump. Within 2 weeks, he will be meeting President Putin in Hungary, to which we know now from talking to Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Kyiv, that President Zelensky only found out the news that he'd been speaking, the US President, for 2 hours to President Putin yesterday. When he arrived in Washington, it kind of took the wind out of his sails, said Gulliver. So the background to this meeting, it was that 2-hour conversation between President Putin and President Trump, where we're hearing from both sides, Moscow and US sources. It was suggesting there was a warming of relations once again, mutual praise, twinned use of language, apparent use of the word productive meeting. We can't wait to meet again. And we just heard there talking about Viktor Orban, who will be the host in Budapest within 2 weeks. Notably, there's an outstanding ICC warrant for the arrest of President Putin, which Budapest is a signatory of, although they withdrew this year, citing political bias. It's not due to come into effect until next year. So interestingly, in the build-up to this, President Trump was in Sharm el-Sheikh on Monday with Viktor Orban, who he was talking about then, and said it's some diplomats say Putin's closest friend in Europe is Mr. Orban. Coincidence then that the Kremlin called the day before President Trump was meeting Mr. Zelensky today. You might very well think that. I couldn't possibly comment. Rob, let's start with you. You were in this time a few months ago when this was ongoing, the last meeting between the two men. What are you making between the comment, particularly on Tomahawk missiles, which Ukraine wants?
Yeah.
No explicit mention.
Yeah. More precisely. I mean, I don't think for one moment that Zelensky was confident that President Donald Trump was going to give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles. He may have hoped somewhere, that there might just be a faint chance that it was going to happen. And he'd been trying his best over the last few weeks to persuade Americans of various persuasions that it was a good idea, that it could turn the trend of the battle between Russia and Ukraine. But I'm sure he wasn't expecting at the very last moment that Donald Trump would pull this trick on him and say that he's going to have a meeting with Putin in Budapest, hosted by Viktor Orban, who Donald Trump calls his best friend in Europe, but is detested by the Ukrainians for the work that Hungary has done under Orban's leadership to make Ukraine's efforts to get closer to Europe harder and harder, to obstruct the efforts of the European Union to provide weapons and financing to Ukraine. So, for him, he must be tearing his hair out at the moment. He thought he was making progress, and he got to the United States again for yet another meeting with Donald Trump, and he's effectively been slapped down.
We'll keep you across those points as we listen to the meeting, in case there are points that are raised before that we haven't heard before, and that often happens, that we've heard a repetitive cycle of comments. So we will keep listening across. Stephen, I'm going to bring you back in at this point. It's worth saying that J.D. Vance was in Brussels this week, and his language was very different from a few months ago. He talked about the fact that if it didn't go Ukraine's way, and if Russia carried on the way it was, there was a sort of implicit threat that the US would act. How do you assess the dynamic, both in the room and with Ukraine and the US right now?
I think you have to understand that this phone call was initiated by the Kremlin. It wasn't initiated by the White House. It was Putin who wanted to get on the phone with Trump before Zelensky arrived. I think Putin was very struck by the talk of tomahawks. I think there would be people in the Pentagon who would think the idea of giving Ukrainians missiles that can hit Moscow is not the best idea. I think Putin wanted to stress to Donald Trump that this would change the relationship and might put an end to the negotiations Trump wants. And then, of course, Putin, who's very good at this, everybody's learning how to flatter Trump, but Vladimir Putin's particularly good at it. Trump thinks he's a great guy, a great pal. He's very frustrated with him, but Putin is really, really good at deflecting Trump's anger at himself back onto Zelensky. So this is a game of, trying to get Trump's ear. Now, Vance is an interesting case because, frankly, Vance is much more of an isolationist than Trump is. Vance has wondered why we were involved with Ukraine at all. But don't forget, even when they're meeting, I mean, Trump and his administration, they're not giving Ukraine money right now. They're just sort of saying generously that the Europeans can buy weapons from America to give to Ukraine. But by giving less to Ukraine, they have less leverage over Ukraine. And so it's just very hard for me to see that either Putin or Zelensky really want a ceasefire, not on Trump's terms, certainly not on Steve Witkoff's terms. So my guess is if this meeting in Budapest happens, and the difference from Alaska is they're actually going to have Rubio and Lavrov prepare the meeting. Alaska was kind of done on the seat of their pants, then maybe there'll be a real agenda. But when Trump says 2 weeks, this is Trump's idea of it'll happen pretty soon. So we'll see.
Very, very interesting. President Trump has been talking about how he was going to explain to President Zelensky about this call with Putin. Let's take a listen, because President Zelensky is now speaking, and let's have a listen in again to this conversation.
One is extremely competent. Incompetent.
Sir, a few weeks ago in New York when you two met, you said that you think Ukraine could ultimately take back all the territory that it's lost. Do you still think that's the case, or do you think there'll have to be some sort of
You never
swap of
know. Look,
territory?
war is very interesting. You never know, do you? You just never know. With war and peace, but you never know. Please.
Russia calls Tomahawk supply to Ukraine as an escalation, yet it continues using similar cruise missiles like Caliber. And
Yeah.
even
Who are you with?
Ukraine.
You Ukraine?
Yeah. But Russia continue even using the cruise missiles and also nuclear-capable ballistic missiles in Ukraine since 2022. So do you consider providing Ukraine with the Tomahawk or similar missiles as an opportunity to equalize the possibilities of Ukraine and Russia and push Moscow to the negotiation
Yeah,
table?
sure. We're going to be talking about that. That's why we're here. Okay? Fair question. Exactly as he told you to say it, but we're going to be talking about it. Okay? Yeah, please.
Mr. President, message to India and Hungary, who is still refusing.
You said India and Hungary? That's an interesting. India and Hungary. It's an interesting combination.
Refuse to stop buying Russian oil.
Well, India is not going to be buying Russian oil anymore. And Hungary is sort of stuck because they have one pipeline that's been there for years and years and years, and they're inland. They don't have sea. They don't have sea. And I spoke with the very great leader of Hungary, and they are, it's very hard for them to get oil. I understand it. Hungary's in a very interesting position because they can't have ports. They're surrounded by land. So we'll see what happens there. But India will not be buying oil from Russia. And they've already de-escalated, and they've more or less stopped. They're pulling back. They bought about 38% of the oil, and they won't be doing it anymore.
Mr. President Trump has been helping you in achieving peace in Ukraine.
Who has?
First Lady Melania Trump
Yeah.
has been helping in returning abducted Ukrainian children from Russian captivity. President Zelensky, do you appreciate those efforts? How do you assess them? And did you ask her to step in and to help you?
No, she wanted to do it. She's felt very strongly about the children, and she's done a really good job, I think, in bringing it to the fore. We have a lot of children involved. Now, it's some people say it's 20,000, and some people say it's 300. There's a big difference between that, so nobody really knows. But she felt very strongly about the children. She thinks about the children all the time.
President Trump, if you okay Tomahawks to Ukraine, what's going to happen if the United States is in a conflict and we need the Tomahawks?
Well, that's a problem. We need Tomahawks, and we need a lot of other things that we've been sending over the last 4 years to Ukraine. We've been, we gave them a lot. Now we have a different situation. We send it to the European Union. They pay for it and all that, and they have plenty of money. But it's beyond the money. We need Tomahawks, and we need a lot of other weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. And one of the reasons we want to get this war over is exactly that. It's not easy for us to give. You're talking about massive numbers of very powerful weapons. So that's one of the things we'll be talking about. Hopefully they won't need it. Hopefully we'll be able to get the war over with without thinking about tomahawks.
I
think we're fairly close to that. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say,
yeah, please.
Just you to understand. So for today, of course, we want to finish this war, but the war is another technological war. You don't use just tomahawks. If you want to target a military goal, you need thousands of drones. It goes together with such missiles. Ukraine has such thousands of our production drones, but we don't have tomahawks. That's why we need tomahawks. But United States is a very strong production, and the United States has tomahawks and other missiles, very strong missiles, but they can have our thousands of drones. That's why where we can work together, where we can strengthen American production.
And so just so that I understand, so you're suggesting kind of a trade. If President Trump okays Tomahawk missiles to help you launch
yes, it's
into
about
Russia,
military goals. It's only about military goals.
Right, but then you would authorize some kind of an exchange where
yes, of course.
The US
yes, we have proposition. Yeah, we have brief proposition with our drones.
President Trump, I don't mean to be brokering an arms deal here, but is that something that you would be interested in, Ukrainian drones?
We are, yeah, we would. We have a lot of drones right now. We build our own drones, but we also buy drones from others. And they make a very good drone. I mean, drone warfare has really come to the fore over the last couple of years because of this war. I will say, there's nothing like the jets. You know, we knocked out a lot of drones in Israel. We were knocking them out for Israel, and we were doing it with extremely fast and powerful jets, following the drones and knocking the hell out of them. So, it's, you know, we know a lot about the drones, and we know a lot about the great jets, the great ones. The ones, well, and the B-52s, which were totally they were stealth. They were undetectable. So we have a lot of different weapons. And, you know, I have an obligation also, though, to make sure that we're completely stocked up as a country, because you never know what's going to happen. In war and peace, right? You never know what's going to happen. So we're going to be talking about tomahawks, and would much rather have them not need tomahawks. Would much rather have the war be over, to be honest, because, you know, we're in it to get the war over. We're selling a lot of different types of weapon, as you know, to the European Union. We're not in it for that. We're in it to get it over. We're losing thousands of people a week, thousands of people, Russian, Ukrainian, and mostly soldiers. I mean, mostly soldiers. But we're in it to see that end. And if we can end quickly, and I think we can. I mean, I had a very good talk yesterday. We're going to be talking about it. But I had a very productive talk yesterday with President Putin. We'll see what happens. But the war in the Middle East was far more complicated. We got that one done. And I think we have a good chance. I think President Zelensky wants it done, and I think President Putin wants it done. Now all they have to do is get along a little bit.
Can you give us an update on the trade negotiations with China, or perhaps Secretary Bessent?
Yeah, I will, and I'm going to let Scott do that. But I think we're doing very well. I think we're getting along with China. China would like to have something. As of this moment, we'll be meeting in a couple of weeks. We'll be meeting in South Korea.
You think
myself.
Will go forward?
I think so. It looks like it's going forward. I think so. They want to meet. We like to meet. I have a very good relationship with President Xi, and we're going to see what happens. But, you know, for years we were taken advantage of by China very badly. We were losing hundreds of billions of dollars a year to China. We really built their military, if you think about it. The kind of money that presidents allowed to be lost to China was just insane. And then when I came into office, as you know, I put very severe tariffs. So we took in hundreds of billions of dollars in my first term from China. Biden let that go because it was so much. He let it continue, but he gave all sorts of exceptions. And by the time you looked at it, Scott, I would say it wasn't the same thing.
So we're watching the press conference between President Trump and President Zelensky. They've talked for the past 20 minutes about Ukraine. They've got on to other issues, trade and China. Let's go back in with our panellists tonight. And Rob Parsons, listening to that, I think the outcome so far, saying that or how close an ally Viktor Orban is to President Putin and to him. He's the perfect man. He does a very good job. The kind of ruling out, which we thought President Zelensky was going to be in Hungary, and also not really giving an answer on Tomahawk, saying that he wanted to end the war without that happening, and he was hopeful that he could, suggesting that with the Tomahawks, it's an escalation, but we'll talk about that, was his quote.
Yeah, I mean, the Tomahawks would be an escalation, for the reasons that Steve just mentioned a few minutes ago. If you give the Ukrainians the ability to attack Moscow directly, I'm not saying that that's what they would do if they got Tomahawks, but they would certainly have the capability, and that would create the concern, obviously, in Russian minds. And President Putin has been saying precisely that. When he had that conversation with Donald Trump the other day, that if you go down this path, you change our relationship in a completely different way. Whatever words he used, I don't know. Frankly, it doesn't really change very much. We've been through various stages of this relationship between Russia and the United States, in which Russia said, well, if you give them F-16s, that's going to change the relationship. If you give them ATACMS, that's going to change the relationship. Nothing really changed. In the end, Russia is going to need an interlocutor in the United States to help get this war brought to an end. But is at this stage Russia at all interested in bringing this war to an end? I would say absolutely not. And he's stringing Trump along. The amazing thing is that Trump allows himself to be strung along. But he does, for whatever reason. But for Putin wanting to end the war now? No, absolutely not.
Alex, the economist, this is going to be a field day, isn't it, as we look towards Hungary whenever this happens, for Russian bot farms, trying to make Europe look weak, looking for splits and divisions.
Absolutely. One of the things that Russia has been really experimenting with its hybrid warfare, effectively, is trying to work out ways to use cyber attacks to expose weaknesses in Western societies that Western societies can't really retaliate over. One of the interesting trends that we've seen in the cyber theater is that Russia has historically shown a lot of interest in what you might think of as sort of fairly obvious targets for cyber attacks, high-value targets like power stations or water treatment facilities. The recent spate of really damaging attacks on civilian infrastructure, on grocers in the UK, on Jaguar Land Rover, on Asahi in Japan, suggests that there may be an underappreciated strategic weakness in the civilian sector. It's fairly easy to imagine someone in the Kremlin looking at Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op shelves running dry in the UK and going, well, okay, what happens if 6 or 7 grocers are hit at the same time? It's going to become a really difficult field of battle to defend on.
No good. Just listening to Alex and just trying to take heed of what President Zelensky said again in that meeting. He talked about using the energy, using the spirit of the Gaza talks to bounce President Trump into focus mode to do the same with Ukraine. He said on his way to meet him as well, if the war can be stopped in one region, then surely other wars can be stopped, kind of play into that, Trump towards the Nobel Peace Prize, the man that can solve 7 conflicts or more, yet to be verified. Is there truth to that, or is the truth of the opposite argument too, that attention on Ukraine is lost because of the focus on the next steps for Gaza?
It's hard to know. When I was in Hostages Square on the day that the hostages were released, there were a number of journalists there who had been shipped in by their news organizations from Kyiv to cover these events in Israel. And it did occur to me that if there was a major Russian attack that day, there would be much less media to cover it. I think that for Donald Trump, it's important to hear Zelensky use the word momentum and give him credit. I certainly think that Trump felt in Israel that he got tangible results, and he did. Probably more tangible than in any of the other conflicts for which he takes credit. And there may be momentum. I hope so, but it is very difficult to see how Putin, who has always expressed just the desire to continue this war and seems to have the human and kinetic resources to do it, will identify with that momentum or cooperate. So far, we haven't seen any of that happen.
Let's bring in, for a guest appearance, as he's at the White House right now, we can get a closer to the ear on the ground. Fraser Jackson, our Washington correspondent. Fraser, my take from what we're hearing as we're watching events is it's kind of a holding pattern right now for President Zelensky. Let's see what happens in the talks to come.
Yeah, to be honest, it doesn't really feel like there's been much headway made. Of course, remember, the two men have not actually spoken to each other yet. This is taking place before the actual bilateral working lunch that we are expecting the two men to discuss each side of their arguments at. But there was an interesting moment that kind of a bit went under the radar. Donald Trump saying, I think we'll agree to peace in Hungary, which, of course, would mean that if indeed we stick to this 2-week timeline, which again, as I've said, consistently on the air on France 24 over the last day or so, the 2-week timescale in Trump land does not mean 2 weeks in the real world. It is normally the timescale that Donald Trump gives to things that he wants to not deal with in the immediate term and kind of kick to a later time period. So whether we actually see this happen within an actual 2 weeks, I wouldn't really hold your breath. However, that being said, the Hungarians are saying that they are making preparations. But if that does happen, Donald Trump says that he thinks he'll get Putin to agree to a peace deal in Hungary. So some quite significant developments there. The other thing is that we heard from Zelensky, who was talking about the Tomahawks and the drones that the Ukrainians are using on the battlefield at the moment. He said that the Ukrainians have become very adept at producing these drones, and he's basically floated the idea of some kind of exchange of Ukrainian drones for Tomahawk missiles. That was quite a revealing and interesting moment that kind of seemed to put Donald Trump a bit on the back foot at the first instance, when he was then asked by one of my press colleagues in there whether that would be something he would be interested in. He then said, yeah, we could be open to that, and then kind of pivoted to other firepower means that the US has. But there has been a couple of developments in this. But so far, I would say that this hasn't really produced any kind of blockbuster headlines, certainly not like we've seen in other meetings between the two men in the Oval Office.
Well, it's le mi-temps, it's half-time. Let's see what happens when they actually sit down, and in the next hour or two come back, and we'll come back to you as well, Fraser. Thank you for that. Fraser Jackson, our correspondent in Washington. Well, going back and staying with the big events of the world this week to look at, one of the points that every single person in that room uses as a tool of diplomacy, particularly President Trump, is social media, with Truth Social, carrying out public diplomacy on it hour by hour. And it's worth saying this week, Sunday, Alexis Ohanian, the co-founder of the social media site Reddit, became the latest notable figure in the world of big tech to warn about the amount of AI-generated so-called slop online. Easy produced, low quality, repetitive content that clogs up our feeds. He was commenting on the case of an obese cat called Pound Cake, whose owner posted daily updates to thousands of Reddit users. It's become a viral story detailing this heartwarming, dramatic weight loss story, only it was an AI con. Pound Cake didn't exist. The wider warning came from Alexis Ohanian, is something called dead internet theory, the theory that the internet is dominated by bots, not human interaction. And Sam Altman, the co-founder and CEO of OpenAI, which is in charge of ChatGPT, as we look at Pound Cake, he once dismissed the idea as a conspiracy having little merit, but admits he's taken aback by the sheer number of large language models dominating X. On Monday, Forbes magazine published an article on the increase in AI slop, quoting new research by cybersecurity Imperva, showing for the first time internet traffic generated by bots surpassed that of humans. 51% bot created, 49% human is the figure for 2024. Alex, dead internet theory is something you've been looking at for some time. This term has been around for a few years. Set out for us how the term first emerged and how it's gone from conspiracy to gaining credence.
Of course. The term first emerged a few years ago, long before actually the current AI boom. And it was sort of like Sam Altman said, a conspiracy theory, or perhaps a postmodern joke. You know, you can never tell on the internet. It was this idea that the rise of sort of relatable content that you were seeing on social media in the early 2020s, late 20-teens, wasn't because people were all having the same thoughts at the same time and posting them. It was because actually there were only about 1,000 people on the internet and everything else was a computer. In 2019 and 2020, that was a laughable suggestion, right? What we were seeing, in fact, at the time was the result of a feedback loop between the curation algorithms on sites like Twitter and Instagram and people who just wanted to get famous. So they see something going viral, they post a riff on the same thought, you end up with a user base full of people just posting stuff that makes the computer happy. It looks like bots, but it's real people. What's happened since then is the conspiracy theory has become, to a certain extent, true. A substantial portion of most social networks now is AI generated, both explicitly in people posting AI generated videos labeled as such, or at least sort of fairly obviously fake, this thing that has become known as slop, and then also less explicitly, a huge quantity of text posts on sites like Twitter, x.com, and Blue Sky appear to be AI generated. They're posted at a rate that seems inhuman. They're posted on accounts that are active 24 hours a day. They're sitting there politely disagreeing with many, many people at scale. Why is unclear, but they are. And that raises the question of whether the social internet is really living or if it is actually dead now.
In terms of implications, Alex, of dead internet theory, if we're seeing 51% through the whole of last year that was bots rather than humans, where are you seeing this going?
So that stat's an interesting one because it's at the other end. It's not talking about posts made on social networks, it's talking about traffic online. So it's about the extent to which a website receiving hits from the internet is receiving them from real users searching through or from various sorts of automated traffic. That can be web crawlers, it can be AI agents, or it can be malicious users searching for weaknesses in websites to try and exploit. All of that, though, has the same outcome, which is that it upends the economics of publishing on the internet. The first order of problems for the AI boom is coders, really, who are seeing their job easily automatable by AI systems that are capable of doing their work at a much faster pace. But the next issue is going to be media economics. It's going to be anything that makes a living by publishing content for readers to read, supported by adverts or subscriptions. Because if the users of the web are replaced by bots, then there's no one for the advertisers to advertise to. There's no money in creating original content for the internet, and an entire leg of our news ecosystem collapses.
So there's a world of journalists seeking sanctuary. Noga, how is a surge in AI slop affecting your work in the Middle East, in verification, fact-seeking? How much does it help? How much does it hinder what you're trying to do?
Look, I haven't found that it helps at all. And I'm the daughter of a physicist who from the start told me that he thought that this AI boom that we're living through was a sort of PR bubble. So I do keep that in mind. What we've seen here in Israel is, first of all, the use of a lot of use of AI to create false images, both from Israel, but mostly from Gaza, fake news, to call it that, fake images. But we've also seen the Prime Minister himself copying Donald Trump, posting AI videos of himself heroically, or of himself putting on Trump's neck, around Trump's neck, a fake Nobel Prize. So in a way, we have reverted to a place where top leaders, international leaders, have become adolescents playing with an online game. And I personally, as a journalist, I haven't been able to find any assistance or support in it because I don't trust the AI engines that we have right now. And too often on matters that I do know about, the responses that I get to a question are not useful. So I have my doubts.
Well, we've recently seen in the past few days Elder Williams, the daughter of the late comedian Robin Williams, publicly plead to AI content creators to stop sending her unsolicited deep fakes, videos of her dad telling them, quote, "You're not making art, but disgusting, over-processed hot dogs out of the lives of human beings." Steve, talk me through how you steer through social media and navigate the pitfalls of AI fakes and artificial content in your journalism.
It's really hard to do it. I mean, I think it's very dangerous, obviously, particularly when it's in the hands of clever PR people working for companies, working for politicians. I think normal people cannot be expected to go to the trouble of figuring out whether something's real or not. And even if it's fake, many people find it amusing, right? So, I mean, this is part of the game. Trump, for example, has learned how to be amusing. That's one of his great strengths as a politician. But for journalism, I think it's a disaster, frankly. And, you know, like everyone, you play with AI personally, not professionally. And I find, it often gives me the wrong answers. And when you tell them that it's wrong, they say, yeah, you're right, we're sorry. They're just trying to please you. I mean, they're not neutral and they're not objective. They want you to keep going. So I think this is a great danger. And, we have strong rules at the New York Times, as I'm sure you do at France 24, about what's usable and what isn't. And I think we're heading for a real problem. I think people have enough trouble deciding what's real and what's fake. Just all the movies about cartoon characters. People seem to love all that stuff. And I don't blame people for loving what they love, but keeping the line between reality and enhanced reality, I think it's going to be very difficult for all of us.
And that's it. It's got you in that dichotomy. It's got you for a few seconds. You're laughing. We're laughing. The thought of it. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, as Alex was just saying, went further to say it's not just slop on the increase. People are adopting. They're writing the quirks of LLMs, language learning models. We can see it. It's an interesting point, to which Rob's just checking on his language learning model. But his own tool, ChatGPT, is accelerating this flood of synthetic text, blurring lines with Sora 2, where you can insert yourself in hyper-realistic AI videos. And as Steve was laughing at, this is a couple of examples. This is Michael Jackson, for example, and Einstein.
Nice pal.
Woo! Yo, he stole my chicken!
Got a crispy treasure, can't slow me down. Hot and golden, I'm out of this town. Move, Friday, victory.
Well, get back here.
Run, spin, slide, I'm gliding out the door. Fried love in my arms, can't give it up no more.
Listen, mathematically, the decision is irrational. I land the significant strikes with higher momentum, yes? Energy equals 1/2 mv squared. Yeah. His mass is smaller.
Paid content, Alex, is one possible theory, but give us a solution. Is that it? Where is this going in terms of a sanctuary, in terms of some hope against the slop and the dead internet?
Oh, you want hope? I'm afraid you've come to the wrong person. The phrase that I keep coming back to in this is the Gutenberg parenthesis, which is this idea that the modernity ushered in by the creation of the first printing press is actually a short-lived period in human history. And that this is taking us back to a world of oral culture, where you believe things that you've been told by people you trust, and you don't really have any source of information beyond that.
Wow.
Sorry.
Rob, a thought from you, because look, Stephen, Noga, Alex, and you particularly, years after you started out in journalism, the resources you had, were you happier when it was more straightforward? Are you actually finding benefits in the AI world?
Oh, absolutely. Listening to what Steve was saying just now, you can't disagree with that. And the notion that we're heading back towards the oral traditions of hundreds of years ago it's almost credible at the moment, the way things are going. But having said that, now that I've retired and I'm writing a book, I do find ChatGPT a useful research tool. Quite a reliable one as well. You can spot where it makes mistakes. You go back to it and say, like Steve was just saying, look, I don't think that's correct. It'll correct the mistake and say, thank you very much. You corrected me on that. You were right. But by and large, I have to say, as long as you're approaching it with a lot of background information of your own so that you have context, it's a pretty reliable tool.
Well, a solution against all the slop. Thank you so much for all the panellists tonight, and on a night where we had constant discussions, ongoing developments at the White House. We're told that these come to an end. They are now talking, they are meeting. We'll bring you that on France 24 as well. But thank you for watching. Thank you to a brilliant panel, clarity, insight, telling us lived perspectives that cannot be plucked out of an AI data scraped search. My guest this week with me in the studio, the Season's World Affairs editor, analyst Rob Parsons. From Jerusalem, Noga Tarnopolsky, France 24's Jerusalem correspondent. Thank you, Noga. From Berlin, Stephen Erlanger, chief diplomatic correspondent for Europe at the New York Times. Thank you, Stephen. And from London, Alex Hearn, AI writer at The Economist. Well worth watching Alex and The Economist's new Insider behind-the-scenes series, The Insider AI, starting Tuesday, November the 4th. Thank you, Alex. We will see you all in 7 days for the world next week.